Okay, so we have a fresh scene, and let's set up a little scene here. So we'll start, make a cube. What this is going to be is our environment. All right. And what I want to do when I'm setting up the scene is just kind of keep track of where the floor is. I want the floor or the top of the table or whatever to kind of align to this grid right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the pivot, which you can see here, this little controller, this pivot point for the cube to the bottom so I can put it right on the floor. To do that, I hit D. So D, instead of moving the object, moves the pivot, right? And I also want this pivot to be aligned exactly to the bottom of the cube. So to do that, you can turn on snapping up here. These are all different types of snapping. Snap to point, snap to curve, start to crib. But what I do is I just hold down V. And see, when I hold it down, that snapping pops up. And I put that, hold down V, snap it to the bottom, hit D again, and now I've moved the pivot to the bottom of the cube. Then I want to put it right on the floor, and once again I'm going to use snapping, but this time I'm going to snap it to the grid. All right, so I have a cube right on the floor. Okay, so what this is going to be is just basically a ground plane and a backdrop. And now that it's on the floor, it's kind of easy to scale. I know that it's always going to be on the floor, and I can make it as big, as small, as as wide or as deep as I want. But right now it's a cube, and what I'm looking for is a back wall and a ground plane. So somehow I need to get these sides here, which are called faces, and delete them. So there's, in Maya, there's so many different ways to do things, but the easiest, or I think the best way to do it, is you right-click on the object, and this contextual menu comes up. And there's tons of these little contextual menus in Maya to let you do different stuff. So, it's really handy. Like you when you click on stuff, it'll offer suggestions of like what you want to do next. In this case, we want the faces, but each of these different components, so like for example, this edge, lets you manipulate different components of the mesh, and this is kind of the basis of what you would do for modeling. So that's the edge, here's the vertex, right? But we want the face. And so now what I'm going to do is just grab all these faces out here and delete them. All right, so let's see, what else is going on here? If we look at the bottom, it's lit, but the inside is just black. And the reason for this is by default, the viewport only lights one side of the object, and they light the side of the object in which the normals are facing out. If that makes no sense to you, that's fine. We're going to talk about normals later in a bit of detail. But for now, all we need to do is just make sure two-sided lighting is on. Okay. So, okay. Now, another thing to kind of note as we're kind of getting introduced to Maya is how Maya works a little bit. So if we go to General Editor, Node Editor, these nodes pop up. So what do we have here? We have the pasted cube transform. The transform is like where the mesh is positioned, right? And then we have the shape, which is the geometry of the mesh, these actual points. So the transformation moving these group of points. If we grab this shape node, right, and hit map input and output connections, we realize there's actually like more going on here than we thought. So what we have is a command saying, okay, make a cube. And then after the cube is made, we deleted some faces, right? So if I delete this, the faces come back, right? And what this is, this kind of chain of nodes in which you see kind of one action stacked on top of another, in Maya is called history. It's a little bit of proceduralism, like this idea of nodes kind of stacked together to make things is, is at the root of the interface and say things like nuke or Houdini. And, in Houdini, you have a lot more control over exactly which components are selected and all that sort of thing. But it's the same, like, kind of basic philosophy. Like, each kind of command, each action is a node, and you're stacking them together and having the kind of data flow, from one end to another. And there's this too, which we'll talk about later. So that's just be aware that that's what's happening.